Morning all. So I thought, like, because it's GDC week, I'd talk a bit more about games conferences and why they're needed. In the background here is Terra Nil, a lovely little puzzle game. So the main thing I wanted to mention was, why do we need game conferences? So the main thing I sort of want to start with is, why did GDC start? And a lot of it was because, in a pre internet world, we were like, hey, we're trying to make things for this hardware. It's not super documented. Hey, we're making games. A lot of people haven't made games before. What does making a video game look like? Who are your customers? How are you distributing to stores? Oh, did you know that if you did this to the Atari or the Commodore, you can get this out? You know, oh, have you heard about this new Apple II thing? There was a lot of information sharing that was going on that was critical to getting stuff done, basically, figuring out what was even possible. And so that, for the longest time, has kind of been the root of games conferences of, hey, we have information, we want to share that information, and go, this is what we're doing, what are you doing? um, and that is really the crux and core of so much of what people do with games conferences. However, that purpose is not best served by games conferences anymore because, we now have, well, for a while we had trade magazines, and then, the internet became a lot more of the information spreading source. A lot of the things like YouTube and stuff provided information for people. There was a lot of places now you could figure out not only how to make games, but how to run a games business, and the industry standards, and obviously the amount of knowledge that you need to make games changed as well. When it was starting, it was largely garage or solo endeavor, whereas now we have multi-track conferences because there's so many different professions and there's different subject matter that people want to talk about. um, it is one of those not chicken and egg situations, but one of those situations where there's just so much you could talk about. So it's like, oh, okay, let's spread out, let's diversify the topics of discussion and such. And so you get multi-track conferences. But yeah, now we're in the age of YouTube. Now we're in the age of the magazines are dead. A lot of the expo floor stuff, where it was the only time you could get information from Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo or those players, that's gone away. I'd say for a lot of middleware companies and a lot of services companies, they're probably not getting the bulk of their sales leads from an event like GDC or that. So there's less of a need to attend a physical conference. So, there's been a whole raft of things that have changed up why people want or need conferences. So this has been going on, but for the last while, shall we say, even though conferences have been changing in purpose, they have become sort of the gathering hub, right? Because, and again, I'm focusing on the big conferences at the moment. I think there's a separate thing we need to talk about with the smaller conferences. But for the big conferences, it became, hey, we're all moving across the world for different jobs where, you're constantly shifting around because the games industry, like the film industry, is just one of those jobs that if you work in this field, chances are you've moved city and possibly even moved country for work. And because of that, you have a very different community and culture. So there's a lot of friends you only ever catch up at these conferences, and because work is so unstable, you're often looking for what's next, or sort of just to keep your professional network intact. So a lot of it is like, hey, here I'm doing a talk, but I'm really here to just show you guys that I'm good at what I'm doing, and maybe hire or work with me in the future. Or I'm catching up with all my friends that I haven't seen for a long time, and this is like the family annual get together or whatever. There's a lot of that behavior going on at conference. Rotate, there we go. So yeah, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this behavior that sort of defined conferences for a while. And then what happened is, COVID happened, frankly, and international travel became very difficult for GDC. A lot of the social get-togethers at GDC didn't really work out. And at the same time, now these problems existed before COVID, in the sense that people were already going, wow, it's really expensive to attend this largely social get-together event. A lot of the people were already going, hey, so the talks, I'll just watch them on the Vault if I want the information, because I'm in a better headspace to record the information, filter through it. I don't want to waste my precious socializing time and networking time with, being in a room, unless I know the speaker, or, a bunch of us are going to the talk together and it's providing sort of this social beat, or I just need to sit down for a while and not talk to people for a bit because I need a bit of a social break. So a lot of the reason why people attended talks wasn't what you think. Oh dear, I needed to... yeah, let's do this. So yeah, talks were already in a difficult place. They were already, oh, well, why are we going to these talks? And so yeah, GDC was already in a difficult place. And there was the other issue of, even before the current administration, traveling to America for a lot of people was tricky. Rami Ishmael was probably one of the leading voices in this, of like, hey, look how expensive it is to travel here, but also look how difficult it is for people from certain parts of the world to come to America, because America's not the greatest place to travel to if you're from this part of the world. So there was a lot of conversation going on around America and around the nature of GDC as a conference. And so it was already sort of, the cracks had appeared. And then COVID happened, and sort of prior to COVID, a lot of the big companies had realized, hey, our best conferences or our best sales leads, like E3 had already died and stuff. So a lot of the companies that were funding, because like tickets are only part of the funding for the event, a lot of the companies that were on the expo hall floor were going, maybe we don't need this giant expensive booth here. Maybe it's not the most cost-effective way now that our digital marketing strategies worked out more. And then a lot of people who previously hadn't been dependent on Zoom and digital meetings were like, maybe we can do, because there was a lot of digital conferences during the lockdown era, and people were like, oh, maybe we can do a new type of conference. So yeah, there was a lot of what do we actually want from conferences, and a lot of people started questioning the status quo, basically, which was really interesting. And I remember going to sort of the first GDC that ran, and the first sort of social events that ran post-lockdown, and people were all having this conversation, they were all going like, okay, what does the future of conferences look like? We're not doing these big parties we used to do anymore because no one's got that kind of money. We're not doing a lot of yes, we're not doing a lot of the stuff that, like, the reasons for the conference to exist initially. Why can we not start a fire? I want to start a fire. Oh, it has to be on that terrain. Okay. There we go. So yeah, the justifications and the reasons for the conferences really started to come under fire. Oh, reduces the cost of some buildings. Yes, please. What else do we need to know? Oh, we need to get... Oh, we need to just get humidity up. Bush. Do we have any other trees locking around? Okay. We just need to get humidity up. Oh yes, we need the burn. Oh, it's a tiny burn. But let's see how that goes. So yeah, everyone's questioning it. The talks are no longer a big thing. The sort of social leads and the sort of marketing leads aren't as big a reason for attendance. So people are like, yeah, well, what are we actually getting out of GDC? And I think that's kind of the point we're at now, where people are questioning what the new thing looks like. What's the new agreement? What's the new arrangement? And I think one of the things that hasn't changed is we definitely need that annual family get-together, those sort of anchor events that justify international travel. And that's a difficult one. I think for a lot of people, Gamescom is going to become that event. It's in Europe. It's a lot easier for a lot of people to travel to. I think some other conferences like Tokyo Game Show, which is still really relevant for a whole range of reasons, is another one. For the UK scene, Develop's a big one, and I think GDC will remain a big one for the North American world to some extent. But I think one of the main things that threatens GDC's position there is the Moscone Centre is not a great venue. A lot of people want to boycott American stuff at the moment. Oh dear, I need more wetland. It is wetland I need, right? Yeah, it's not wetland I need, it's the tree one. There you go. So yeah, it's interesting. I think GDC is a tough thing because obviously they've got a multi-year deal. First of all, anyone who's never run events does not realize how hard running events is, and scaling events is so much harder than people think. Scaling events is just, oof, it's rough. I have not got a ton of experience with it. I know a lot of people who do it, and I have witnessed their agony. So that's my insight into that world, and I would not wish it on my worst enemy. It's one of those things that, yeah, it's just really tough. It's really tough. So yeah, the question is like, what does the future look like? I think at the moment you have a lot of smaller hub events that work well for communities, and I think, oh, there we go, we got them all. Now it's just recycling time. A lot of the small hub events that work for communities is great. So like Harvey runs something at the Loading Bar in London. There's lots of like local get-together things for like the Guildford game developers, or for various sort of smaller game networks. Basically city scale is probably the best way to phrase that. Likewise, there's a lot of other digital communities. So some of these are like formed around a game engine, like there's the Godot events. There's there we go. There is the Godot events. There's also like digital communities like around some game dev influence people that exist, that are a different style of that community. The reason I'm not being an ass, but the reason I'm being like about it is those communities largely exist to service the influencer who is at the center of them. But they do form a network. They do form a thing. Obviously, you have like PlayStation or Xbox or Switch or Steam have their like developer days or their developer only conferences. Those are genuinely still information sharing hubs, largely because, or at least for the consoles, information sharing in other contexts is restricted. So those actually still serve their original purpose to a very large degree, and a very interesting degree actually. So that is one of the more fascinating situations where it's like, oh, okay, you still actually do really want to go to you still really want to go to that event because you want to find out about the new games console, or you want to talk about a graphics library, or you want to talk about some very specific problem you needed to solve. There's also expert level conferences like SIGGRAPH and things like that, where rather than having a dedicated track, there's a dedicated conference for experts in a certain discipline to have sort of those in-depth, detailed conversations about their profession. And I think that's that's another place where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense to have the conversation. Oh, you annoying little git. I put you one out of reach of... That means I'm going to have to make a hole. And to make a hole, I'm going to have to make electricity again. Damn it. Not the most efficient, but hey, we'll solve it. There we go. Now come through here. Lovely. And now we can get all of you captured. Recycle. So yeah, the those events I think will remain active and worthwhile, like the dedicated console developer events, the small sort of city scale, or the digital events as well. Like there's mental health and like network digital conferences. I think digital conferences, they peaked during lockdown. They went away largely. I think they're going to come back in some extent, and I think they're going to make a small amount of the mix, not a huge amount of the mix, because people really like the sort of physical catch-up. So I think there'll always be a smaller part of the mix, but a lot of people don't have the inclination to travel, or don't have the resources to travel. There are a lot of, like, if you're a South African game developer, or New Zealand, or whatever, there's a lot of, or South America, there's a lot of people who, for good reason, have travel issues, or travel expenses they want to avoid. So I think digital will go back up a bit. There's a bit of a mix there. But yeah, GDC is, I think, a bit of a dinosaur. I think they need to find a new venue. San Francisco is not a great city to hold it in. The Moscone Center is not a great venue. But there needs to be a North American conference that is not targeted at gamers. Gamescom works because there's two separate conferences. They're two very, very separate areas, and it's a very purpose-built building. But even Gamescom suffers that, like a lot of game developers who go, they're fighting for gamers for cheap accommodation. So it's very hard to get cheap accommodation for Gamescom. So it's a tough racket. So I think, yeah, GDC basically wants to have an event that people can gather at, a North American event, that is once a year. It's probably gonna have to be near California, just because of the distribution historically of the games industry. A lot of people are saying, a Canadian event would do well, because obviously the Canadian government does a lot of support for video games. Canada, from a travel perspective, is a lot better for most countries. I think a lot of people would feel more comfortable going to a North American conference in Canada than they would America, at least for the foreseeable future. Yeah, it is interesting, because I do think we're at the end of a period. And also from the social gathering point of view, it's like a lot of game developers now have kids, or they don't drink. So like a lot of the sort of rooted in college room sort of frat, get-together behavior that games conferences was built around, is also, I think, largely going to change. And, the wasteland's going to be repaired and reclaimed, and I think we're going to end up in a healthier, more sustainable place. But, yeah, I'll be very interested to see what that is, because I think if you're a programmer, if you're an artist, if you're an exec, you have very different needs for these conferences. And if you compare and contrast with other communities, like the film industry, like the theatre industry, generally the other arts, but then also like trade body conferences and other things. Games is in a weird and interesting position. We do things differently to all of those sectors. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how it evolves. But I think the days of GDC being the largest single gathering of game developers has now ended. That's almost certainly Gamescom now. So end of an era. Anyway, hope this was useful. My throat's largely together. The real test for it tonight will be running role-playing. See if I destroy my throat. Okay, toodles.